Good morning. It's wonderful to be in Munich on such a sunny, beautiful day, and to think about how this city, like so many in Germany, have risen from the ashes of the Second World War and the First World War, to become such vibrant, incredible centers of creativity. Steffi, thanks to you, thank you to the mayor. Steffi has done the most amazing job in creating this DLD environment over the years. But it's just one symbol of how cities bring us together to think in new ways. Cities are the heart of creativity. Cities are the source of progress. Our future, all of our future, the world's future, depends on what cities do. We will be won or lost according to what we do in cities. The great challenges we face, climate change, stopping pandemics, overcoming inequality, finding new solutions to the world's greatest problems will come from cities. And so we need to make cities the places that thrive. We need to make cities the cocoons of innovation that they always have been. Cities are quite new. The idea of a big modern city is really driven by technology. Of course, cities were always the heart of creativity. When we think of the Renaissance of 500 years ago, we think of Florence. We think of this amazing small place, about 100,000 people, that changed the world. It changed perception. It changed the way, not only that we see art, and we think of Da Vinci and Michelangelo, Botticelli, and many others that changed perception, but it changed science, of course. We were no longer the center of the universe. We rotated around the sun, and the sun around others. Copernicus, the oceans that were traversed in the voyages of discovery, discovering the Americas and elsewhere. Out of this inventions coming from this small place, driven then by a technological innovation. The Gutenberg press, developed not far from here, changed the world. But what we also remember about the Renaissance is it was the source of struggle. It was where Savonarola lit the bonfire of the vanities, starting the civil wars that led to the Dark Ages again in Europe, hounding out the diversity that had been absolutely central. 30% of Florence in the Renaissance was Muslims and Jews. Da Vinci himself a vegan and gay. That was no longer tolerated. Europe became a place of division. Cities are the source of creativity, but it can also create the sparks of destruction. They are a precious resource. The technologies of the Industrial Revolution, the railroad, the steam mill, later elevators, air conditioning, cars, these are what define the cities of today. Without these technologies, we would not have these cities. Refrigeration was so vital, all driven by technology. But now we are trapped in cities defined by a circular economy which we don't want. Circles of suburbs, circles of highways, circles of division that separate lives. And that's why we had a great turning point in history. Blake, Engels and Marx, Charles Dickens, many others have written about the dark satanic males, the terrible things, the pollution of the cities, and how terrible these technologies were in creating highly polluted, very, very demeaning places in cities. We need cities which are totally different. And the pandemic, as terrible as it was, creates a new opportunity. The pandemic has changed the way we think. It has made us realize that the opposite of Maggie Thatcher said, there's no such thing, she said, as society, there's only individuals. What the pandemic taught us is that is completely wrong. We are society. We define ourselves in relation to each other. We define ourselves by the communities we're in, by the cities we live in, by the people we want to be with, and of course by our own creativity, which is never individual. It's always collective genius. It's always people sparking off each other. And when we think about the great changes in the world and the movements of change, We can think about the individuals that started them, but they were always part of a team effort. They were always part of this creative cauldron, the kitchen of creativity that cities have become. And that's why we need to preserve our cities. If we want progress, we need to not be atomized. There's a pandemic of loneliness. There's a pandemic of inequality. There's a pandemic of terrible climate change that we need to overcome. And it'll be overcome by redefining our cities. Remote work has created a new opportunity. Many people are working more flexible hours, that's good. But we need to be very careful, because all jobs are apprenticeships. We learn not on Zoom or on Teams, and especially young people need to be with others. They need to be in a working environment, in a studying environment, in a social environment with other people, observing, engaging, creating the sparks of change which are so necessary. Innovation cannot come on Zoom or Teams. Innovation comes from being together, and that's why we are here together. That's why we celebrate DLD and the coming together physically, because we will learn so much more than if we just observe this. Of course, that's better than nothing, but it's much better to be in the room. It's in the room where change happens. And so when we think about the opportunity that remote work's created, let's think about how we redefine our central business districts, how offices which are no longer being used fully become much more mixed residential. Affordability is a critical challenge in cities. The gentrification of cities, the pushing out of working people to further and further away to affordable places, meaning they're more and more reliant on transport to get in, is something we need to reverse. We need to have much more mixed residential areas in our cities. If we are to address climate change, we also need to realize that it's in cities, as the mayor has said, where most of the emissions are coming, but also most of the opportunities arise. Because although something like 2/3 of the world's economy now is generated in city, and all the growth in the world economy is in cities, virtually everything is happening in cities, and the superstar cities are getting bigger and bigger. They are underweight in terms of carbon emissions and other greenhouse gases. It's much more polluting for the atmosphere to be in a rural area, driving a long distance, getting food from a long distance, etc. The idea that somehow if we return to the countryside, we're saving the planet, needs to be examined in detail with the data in terms of how much consumption people are using and how dependent they are. But it's beyond that. It's because services can be delivered in compact areas, and we are able to create and invent. Cities are 2 to 3 times as more productive than outlying villages and rural areas. If we want our economies to grow, if we want to create employment, if we want to create solutions, we need to recognize that we need to fix our cities. So how do we make our cities into different places? How do we make them, as Munich is aspiring to do, zero carbon in 2035? How do we make that happen? Of course, it's across the board, making walkable, livable, 15-minute cities, public transport being affordable. I believe in free public transport, and I believe it should be done. Making cities the place where we can access what we need in a small, cyclable, walkable area. But never forgetting that as our societies age, and of course Germany is at the forefront of an aging society with a very rapid decline in fertility to way below replacement levels, we mustn't just rely on the idea that everyone can be walking and cycling. We need to think about elderly people in this and how they are going to be cared for in these new environments, how their transport will be cared for, how they will access resources. And the pandemic taught us many things on this, because we were able to reach out and support people in ways that were thought impossible before. So we've learned a lot. We learned that we can change our ways overnight. We've learned that governments can do things that were said to be impossible in 2019. 22 trillion euros of money was created for the pandemic. People were paid to stay at home. Europe borrowed for the first time. We did many things, and we looked after our neighbors and cared about them in new ways. Let's not forget that. We need to turn cities, too, into not being the super spreaders of contagious diseases and pandemics, but the circuit breakers. And that requires that we are able to not only manage the inflow and outflow through airports, which are the connectors of our major cities, but also, of course, that we have close monitoring and we have the response to be able to deal with it very, very rapidly around the world. Because anything that starts in any major city in the world will be everywhere in the world in 48 hours. So don't believe that you can live in a cocoon. There is no wall high enough, even for the US or China as it is discovered, which will keep out the great threats we face of climate change, of pandemics, and many others that are still to come. What high walls do is keep out the technologies, the ideas, the people, the investment, and most of all, the will to cooperate that we so desperately need to address our shared global challenges. And that's why Europe is a wonderful, shining example in the year. I'm from Britain, and we've done the biggest act of self-inflicted harm that is imaginable for a country by removing ourselves from this incredible experiment of the late 20th and 21st century. The ability to move between countries, the ability to share resources, the ability to have human rights and democracy at the center of what we do. And Europeans are suffering desperately as the cities of Ukraine are being bombed and demolished. I'm part of a task force in Ukraine thinking about the future of Ukraine cities. And we look to the Reichstag in Berlin and the wonderful Norman Foster, recreation of out of the ashes of war, of a new symbol of democracy and transparency. And we look to Munich and we look to other cities that have created a new life after a terrible war as an inspiration. And it's wonderful that Germany is accepting so many Ukrainian refugees as part of this transitional challenge. So it's a global challenge. It's a challenge of circularity, but thinking of the world as being the circular, embracing, as well as our own communities. Let's not become circular and insulated. That is impossible. It means we will be more vulnerable because the risks will grow, because we manage other people's risks less, and we care about other people's risks less. There is no cocoon for any people in any city that they can create, no matter how wealthy they are. Of course, if you have enough money, you can create a cocoon. Las Vegas, Phoenix in the US, or in the desert, 40 degrees outside and people live happily. But the water that they draw will disappear, and they will find that they are too. Coastal cities face a particular problem. And one of the perplexing things as an analyst of cities is to try and understand the disconnect between house prices in, say, Miami and the observations, which are, if you buy or get, DLD kindly got a lot of copies of Age for the City, you'll see the images of what will happen to major coastal cities with ocean rise. Miami will largely disappear in 100 years. This disconnect between financial markets, housing markets, and what's happening needs to be closed. We need to understand that our future, our children's future, our asset markets are there. Many financial institutions have stranded assets where the valuation of the asset bears no relationship to its future value. And that's because of our myopic, short-sighted visions. So embracing circularity is not only about looking after ourselves and ensuring that our little place is okay, because we will not be okay if everyone else is not okay. We will not stop a pandemic in Munich if we do not also stop it coming from somewhere else. We will not stop the impact of climate change unless we think about how we help others address this too. So circularity is about community. Circularity is about ensuring that we can get where we want to be with zero carbon emissions, and that we create community, a mixed residential, entertainment, work, community. Suburbs created in the 1930s and 40s, amplified in the 1950s and 60s by the motor car, by metro systems, by malls, by the concentration, are not going to disappear. And so we need to take these sanitized suburbs and turn them into communities too, where circular villages make them villages around city hubs, where everything can happen, trying to stop people moving great distances, trying to find that people have what they need within the community. And of course, people at different stages of life need different things. Young people need entertainment, young people need many other things of a different nature, and of course, work is important. Artificial intelligence and generative AI, the topic of tomorrow, is going to fundamentally transform the world of work. Anything that's repetitive and rules-based is likely to be disintermediated. And so what are the jobs of the future? The jobs of the future are doing things machines cannot do. They are about creativity. They are about empathy. They are about things which humans uniquely will do, I think, for my lifetime. I will not have a massage from an AI device. I will not go to a great restaurant and eat a meal created by AI. I will not allow my children or my elderly parent to be looked after by a robot. I will want the comfort of being with other people to listen to great music. I will want to be with people in a safe, sustainable, equitable, fair world. And so while AI will do many things and take away many jobs, it will also put a value on what humans uniquely are about, which is community and creating a circularity around ourselves to sustain ourselves for the future. Thank you very much.